Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, I love it when the snake swallows its own tail. And what I mean by that is, every once in a while as we talk about role-playing games, as we talk about the various aspects of role-playing games, different subjects related to them, we play games, we have experiences, we talk about those. We find that often, or at least I find that a lot of times the subjects that we talk about, they all start to interconnect and become one big giant subject. And so this has kind of happened for me lately, and so I'm going to try to make this video reasonably short, but it is my channel, so don't laugh when the video, when I say I try to make a video short. This video is not going to be about old school Dungeons and Dragons, or basic fantasy role-playing game, or the thief skills, or the skills dispute. It's not necessarily going to be about character competence, or playing a game like The Veil and figuring out, how do we not violate a character concept. Not necessarily going to be about character poisoning, but it's going to kind of incorporate all those things into one, or touch on some of those points, because I found, as I've been talking about various things with various people, all of a sudden after a while you realize, oh, these things are all kind of interconnected. And so what do I mean by that? One of the things that happens, in role-playing games is we find, we come up with a genre we want to play. Maybe the game itself informs us about what that genre is going to be. Maybe we discuss the genre and the game offers us some choices. But we are informed as players, of which the GM is a player. We're informed of what the game is going to be like based upon the genre, based upon the tropes. We're also informed about what the characters are going to be like based partially upon the genre. And it's also based upon the various character concepts that people bring to the table. And these can have many different factors influencing them. It could be simply the idea the player had, bringing that to the table. It could be something in the character creation rules. As you play Uncharted Worlds, one of the things that it does is it has you choose a background to come from in terms of what kind of world did you come from. Was it a farming world, a technocrat world, etc. And then it also has you choose careers or professions. So that's one way that this character concept begins to gel or come across. You may be in a game where you pick a class, which this will inform you of a broad skill set or part of your character concept. You might be playing all for one, but we're all playing musketeers. However, at the same point, you can insert part of your background. So you could be like somebody like Philippe Moreau, who is kind of a poor backwater boy with a little bit of nobility in his blood, or somebody like Martin, who has a lot of nobility. All these various things start to influence or inform you rather of who this character is. What are they maybe capable of? When Briscoe comes to the table and he is certainly built up to be a ladies' man and have a silver tongue, this informs us what kind of character this person is going to be and what their competence level is going to be at certain things. Now, sometimes what can happen is you come to the table, you end up realizing you're playing the wrong game for your character concept, or you've brought the wrong character concept to that game. You are engaging in some form of character poisoning where the concept that you brought to the table, there's no way the mechanics can actually back that up. And you realize you have to adjust. Maybe you find out that the game that you're playing is not going to give you the experience that you want, and you had a little bit of mismatch of what your expectations were. However, let's go back towards all these things informing us of what these characters are supposed to be like now. It behooves all of us to be mindful of that at that point, because this final character concept, the genre concept, the character concepts that we're dealing with, these all inform and guide us in terms of how we narrate things as players and game master. How do we narrate attempts? How do we narrate what the players do? How do we narrate how they act? As the game master, whoever's job it is to now help narrate what the results are, what does a success look like? What does a failure look like? What does a success or failure look like in Star Trek when you're all supposed to be Starfleet officers, or in Star Wars where it's supposed to be this very cinematic Star Wars thing that's going on? What is it's going to look like in everyday life in, All for One Regime Diabolique, where we are playing musketeers with, where it's a game of supernatural swashbuckling horror. What is it going to be like if we're playing a gritty swords and sorcery game? What are things going to be like if we're playing high fantasy? What are things are going to be like if we're playing super high fantasy? Or, maybe we're playing things where just extreme, we're extremely competent and powerful characters. All these kind of inform us what are these situations going to look like. Now, not only does that character concept, like what we're talking about verbally, inform, how we do things and adjudicate situations in the game. Inform, like, how are we going to play this darn thing? It's also the mechanics and the rules. And so these mechanics and rules will also help inform us, what are these characters like? They'll be tied to various skills or things that the characters will try to do. It's one thing to say that your character is a thief, and we can adjudicate, as a game master, okay, well, this guy is going to be able to sneak around and do thiefy things, whatever that might be, more than the average person. However, it's an entirely different thing to have some kind of numbers on the page representing this chance of success. When we've decided to make a die roll, what is your chance of success or failure, and maybe what is the chance of success or failure of somebody who simply doesn't have that level of skill, and be able to compare those things. And that's part of the rabbit hole you fall down into when you're talking about the old school Dungeons and Dragons thief and talking about skills in general. So, at that point, we kind of stumble right into like what Brian Gregory was talking about an awful lot when in our discussion group, talking about character competence. Really great subject, where you're looking at what are the numbers on your character sheet when it says that you're good at stealth, or you're good at empathy, or you're good at sweet talking people and conning, or whatever. What are the numbers on your character sheet? Are they representing your assumed level of competence? Can we translate those numbers into a novice, an apprentice, a journeyman, a master, somebody who is second to none? What number represents what? And at that point, what can we just simply look at the piece of paper, say this guy's a journeyman at having a silver tongue, or traveling that the high wire, or whatever it is, the cat burglar, and realize that when we come up upon certain situations, when the player says, I'm going to attempt to do this, the game master can simply look down there and realize, okay, we don't need to roll dice here. You are simply that good. The whole idea that Ubiquity has of taking the average. And Brian has talked about the idea that you could take this concept further to the point where you can play a game and simply don't need to roll dice, because you can look right on the character sheet and you get a fair idea of how competent people are. Most of the times, and this video isn't necessarily about when to roll dice, although that figures into this whole equation. We're able to look at those character sheets and make decisions, adjudicate what should I do as a game master, what should I do as a player, when somebody you realize your character wants to do something, you narrate that, and the game master can look down and say, okay, I can adjudicate here that we simply don't need to roll dice because your character is that competent. And it's partially based upon that character concept. The whole idea of Cadmus, when we're playing the Veil, being a character who is simply very observant. Or now we've got our say our briscoe when he's trying to talk his way past the guards, or sweet talk anybody. Whereas Martin and Philippe, you look down at our character sheets and you realize they don't have as much of a chance because they simply don't have that type of skill. Maybe they need to roll dice, maybe they don't need to roll dice, maybe it's just going bad to begin with. But when Brice, and they probably do have to roll dice, and we did in our last game. We did not do so well. But when Francois is playing Briscoe and he just holds up that mitt full of dice, there's that moment where you say, no, you know what? You don't need to roll here. That game has a formal way of saying, yes, you can take the average. But then you have to look at what's the chance of success in that game at that point when you've got an average roll in Ubiquity. Say you get this big die pool. It's 10 dice. The average of that is 5. You can do things that you can simply take the average, not roll dice if something requires 5 successes. In that game, and this is not a video about Ubiquity, but as I've talked about before, if you look at the overall chance of what is rolling the average or better in those Ubiquity die pools, it's about 65%. This represents, that still incorporates a chance of failure, but that's a point where it informs the game master and the players. Here's something where you can kind of hand wave it. He's just that good. Different games, have different levels of success or failure built into them as kind of the norm, and that's a whole different rabbit hole I don't want to go down in terms of psychology. However, part of the thing about why people like me might want to raise thief skills in old school Dungeons and Dragons when we're playing the retro clones, starting on a first level to something more like 35% or a 2 in 6 chance, that sort of thing, is because it represents a little bit better. When we're looking down that character sheet, it says, oh, okay, well, this guy is certainly better than everybody else who only has a 1 in 6 chance or 16% chance of success. You can kind of like eyeball there, and it informs you that, okay, maybe he still needs to roll dice in some situations, but he is this kind of apprentice thief. And when we come upon the simple lock, the simple, trying to hide from guards, etc., okay, we can probably hand wave this, whereas we look at somebody else and say, well, you're definitely going to need to roll that 6-sider and pray you roll a 1. And that's part of where that whole discussion of, where do we start these thieves off at, which is, once again, and because this informs us as game masters, well, how do we adjudicate all this? When do we call for a roll? When do we not call for a roll? A lot of it does boil down to, I hate to use terms like old school sensibilities or not even common sense. That's not really true, because you learn these things over time. But, some of us just over a lot of time kind of learned to kind of eyeball situations and realize, all right, this guy is that competent. This is a situation where we don't necessarily need to roll dice. But going right back to it, we're informed by the genre. We're informed by the tropes of that genre. We're informed by the character concepts that are on the table, which are created via the class, via the skills that are represented, but in terms of narratively, but also by these numbers on that piece of paper. And sometimes what happens, for a guy like me, and this, trust me, this is not a skill about those, a video rather about those thief skills. If I have this idea in my head that, even though he's just a starting out thief, it's still a 0 to hero game, I can look down there and see, I have the concept in my head, say even as a game master, okay, Joe's thief is, he's a new thief, but he's definitely better than the guy standing next to him. When I look down at the piece of paper and those numbers don't jive with that character concept, they don't reinforce it, we're almost in the area of character poisoning by mistake. That's when it doesn't work for me. Your mileage may vary, but this is one of those reasons that various games have been developed. Various games have incorporated different skill systems. Various games have had different ways to represent. This is what your character is like. This is how competent they are. This is the right way to play this game. These are the tropes. Really fascinating and somewhat complicated subject. And of course we've all made those mistakes. I think even game designers have made mistakes. I didn't experience the original World of Darkness, but that whole idea that there's a skill system and you look at it and you say, gosh, I didn't put any ranks in something like drive or a residence, so I must not be able to drive and I'm homeless, which doesn't necessarily that's not necessarily what it means. Just because you don't have ranks in a particular skill doesn't mean you are no good at it at all, or certainly can't do anything at all. It just means that yes, the game master can hand wave when you say, I drive a car. I go back to my house. But when you do some fancy show-off driving, at that point, as my friend Dave used to say, a man never stands so tall as when he sits down to do some fancy show-off driving. Then that's when the game master has to look at your sheet and say, okay, well, does your character sheet, does your skill investment represent the ability to do this? That's just one example that we can go on and on about that. But I find this a really, really fascinating subject. How the genre, the game design itself, our understanding, as we sit down and talk about our characters, our character concepts, what the actual game mechanics really reinforce or represent, all really informs how do we play this game. What do you think about all that? Does that make any sense to you?